Hi and welcome to the Homeopathy Health Show. I am Atik Ahmed Bhatti, a fourth generation homeopath with over 20 years of professional experience in this field of healing. In the Homeopathy Health Show, I'll be talking all things homeopathy and natural, with guest interviews, tips and advice, and answering some of your questions. Homeopathy is truly a unique complementary system of healing suitable for all ages, young and old. I'd love to hear from you and welcome your questions on homeopathy and how it can or has helped you. Feel free to email me at health@liketreatslike.co.uk or visit www.liketreatslike.co.uk for more information. Whilst you're there, take a look at the Knowledge Academy and blog section, where you will find interesting information. Both sections are growing day by day, so always check back. So let's begin today's show on UK Health Radio, the world's #1 talk health radio, real feel-good radio. Hi and welcome to another episode of the Homeopathy Health Podcast here on UK Health Radio. As always, I hope and pray you are well and in the best of health, and certainly hope and pray it continues to be that way. Now, I'm delighted to share with you the final part of my conversation with Tony Pinkus, who is the owner and technical director of Ainsworths Homeopathic Pharmacy in London. Today's podcast with Tony is part 3 of this 3-part special series. In part 1, Tony shared his journey to homeopathy and his work at Ainsworths, and in part 2 of the podcast, last week, Tony spoke in great detail about the batch flower remedies and shared his extraordinary insights into how they may be used by intuition and the success he has had. As a grantee of the Royal Warrants of Appointment, Tony also shared some wonderful stories on how the royal family use homeopathy, and that really was a joy to listen to indeed. Now do remember to catch up with both parts 1 and 2 of this special podcast series with Tony Pinkus. Just visit my website www.liketreatslike.co.uk and click on the radio and podcast tab at the top of the page, and you'll find both parts 1 and 2 to listen on demand. Now, in today's podcast, Tony shares his experiences during and post-pandemic. We also talk about homeopathy and farming, tautopathy and how homeopathy can help, especially with alleviating the side effects of conventional medicine, and, something of interest, what Tony gets up to in his spare time. So let's listen to part 3 of my special podcast series with Tony Pinkus, which actually aptly leads us on to the pandemic itself. What was your experience and being at Ainsworths during the pandemic and the help that homeopathy offered for those who had contracted COVID-19?
It was an extraordinary time. I think it was an extraordinary time for all of us, but in the pharmacy we had a deluge of calls from customers who were basically, I think everybody was in a blind panic, and the rampant fear that was palpable was leading people down the path of saying, I think I'm going to die if I get this thing. Give me something to prevent it and give me something to treat it if I have it. And that leads us into 2 areas. On the one hand, there's prophylaxis, homeoprophylaxis, which I alluded to earlier. And then the other hand, there's treatment. And from the treatment arm, there's that sense of what we consider to be the genus epidemicus, the one remedy that you think represents the disease. And the problem encountered with that was, simply put, that if it was a flu, and frequently we get the flu because, we see this from one year to the next. Well, the flu manifests like a Ross-Tox case, or the flu manifests like a eupatorium or a gelsemium or arsenicum or a bryonia. And you can kind of pin it down to one remedy. You see there's so many cases that you start to have a degree of confidence that there's one remedy that's going to come up. The problem with the pandemic was that it seemed to be a multiplicity of different symptom pictures that would follow one after the other. And so, what started off as an arsenicum or a camphor or a bryonia case gravitated a few days later to a phosphorus case or something else, and the symptoms changed. And I was working with some colleagues around the world, and they would come up with all sorts of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and these are the groups of remedies I would consider for that. So there was a degree of confusion, and I think the emphasis being on the fact that this was a very unusual presentation of a disease, which clearly the body had difficulty dealing with, and it's a virulent disease in the beginning. And there's no end of conspiracy theories that will talk about, probably conspiracy facts, as the fact this is a gain of function virus that has great difficulty being recognized and treated by the body. So the next phase was, well, can we consider a no-so? Can we consider a prophylaxis and a remedy for never been well since? And at that time, we had a coronavirus remedy in our bank of remedies that I was aware of, but it was very much a conventional coronavirus. Now, if you take if you think coronavirus is a bog standard virus, there's millions of them, and they tend to cause respiratory problems or diarrhea type of problems. So we're dealing with something different here, and what you need is a sample of the actual nasty bug itself. But that wasn't going to be very easy to get hold of. And then, a friend of mine, Yubraj Sharma, who runs his own shamanic college and is a dean of medicine at the Faculty of Homeopathy, said, "Oh, I've downloaded the Wuhan code because they published it on the internet, and I run it through a vial. Here, would you like an electronic potency of it?" And I said, "Okay, I'll take that." And I ran that. But I had this gut reaction that said, there's something not right about this, because, and I then kind of said, well, what's the problem? Well, if I make something, as an electronic potency, I'm sure it will work, but for how long? Because there's a disconnect between this thing that I'm making and this thing's position in nature. So in other words, it never has a position in nature. And if you consider that, what we're in this illusion of reality, we're in this illusion of separation, but in reality, everything is a totality. And so you have to act in a sense of recognizing that unity. And so if you take something from nature when you make a remedy, it's forever connected when you made the remedy to its original source. So I wanted to have a remedy that was made from the original source. And at which point my daughter phoned me up and said, "Oh, Dad, I think I've got COVID-19. I said, "Great, I'll hold on to that. I'm coming over and I'll give you a test tube, spit in this test tube." And I was able to get a sample to make a remedy. So, kind of sterilize this remedy. But a strange thing happened. And when I started making it, I was guided to make two versions of the same thing, and to make one just as a conventional conventional homeopathic remedy, and to embrace a kind of a healing energy into the second one. And I've kind of written about this, and and some publications done, because it's kind of working with nature in putting this vibration in. And then I was encouraged to prove both of them and compare the difference. And they both had an effect, but the one that had the healing vibration in had a significant advantage to the other one, insofar that it kind of activated the what's called the etheric double, which is this healing pranic vitality that goes around the body. And that activated, it sank into the body, and it created a level of well-being. And I thought, okay, this is all very new. It's a different way of making a remedy. And so I started to make that available to people. And at the time, there was a large frontline community of nurses and doctors that were under a lot of stress. And we gave 500 of them this remedy. And they would start coming back and saying, oh, you mean the happy pill? And what they were experiencing when they took it was what I felt when I made it, which is quite an extraordinary thing. And over the last 2 or 3 years, I've made a sequence of these no-sos that have all had that healing vibration in, and have gone deeper and deeper into this realm. Now, it starts to get interesting because they are also, in like the bachelor remedies I was talking about earlier, activating the patient to do what they came here for. So we come back full circle to a discussion of the remedy being a vehicle for empowering the person to take control of their life, to take responsibility for their life and the choices that they're making, so that they go through the lessons that they need to go through. And that the symptoms that accrue from rejecting that are essentially the consequences of choices that are being made by them. And so then there's a marriage between using the no-sos and also using this ABC method, because if you get patients who are willing to say, okay, fine, when the symptoms come out, I accept this is a consequence of choices I'm making, that's fine. But when you have people who are very anti dealing with any symptoms, and so as a patient, they come to you and say, I don't want to take these, and these symptoms have come up, I don't want to deal with them, give me something to antidote the remedy, I don't want to deal with them. I use this batch-flower method to enable them to come to terms with what they refuse to listen to. Because from my point now, the movement forward is to encourage patient responsibility and empowerment rather than patient dependency and lack of an understanding of what they're going through. So, everything is done at the grassroots, be it with the farmers or with the patients that come in, enabling them to have the opportunity to really take more responsibility for their lives, and by being empowered to do so.
It's very interesting, that final point that you've made, and your observations, of course, with COVID and the preparation is fascinating. But I was actually mentioning this. We're talking about Pat Ahern, and I spoke to him about this as well recently. That one of the beauties of homeopathy is also the fact of empowerment. So when acute cases or situations arise at home or with loved ones of any type of trauma or complaint, 50-60% of the trauma that could have been associated with that ailment or disease is removed because you're empowered. So you know what to do, you know what remedies to take, you know what remedies to give, and that's such a positive for the immune system itself, because sometimes you become ill, and generally, let's say, the response from the majority is, okay, call 111 or dial 999 or call the GP, and then there's anxiety of booking an appointment, and then there's trauma associated with all the different things that perhaps you might have to undergo for a diagnosis. Whereas with homeopathy, it's like, throbbing headache, flush face, whatever, redness, belladonna, because your fever's high as well, spiked, it's done. And 50% of the trauma that's associated with that is removed, which can only be a good thing. Is that not right? For the immune system, but also for your vital force itself, the energy.
Absolutely. And I think it's important that you recognize the word doctor means is teacher. That your role is to teach and to assist the patient to come to terms with the conditions that they've brought to their door as a personal and individual lesson for them. And we all have lessons. We're all here to learn our individual lessons, and each lesson is different, and therefore trying to assume that they're going through the same thing as somebody else is something that you realize is foolhardy, because they're having their own experience. Likewise, we choose individual remedies based on the presentation of the case. So there's a lot to be learned, isn't there? I mean, there's a lot to understand here. And I think when people recognize, and that there is an opportunity for them to help themselves, the question is, do they want to take it? Because this is a free will planet. And we are always going to have these opportunities come to our door, because that's what we signed up for when we incarnated. That we came in with a game plan, we came in with a whole load of things that we wish to learn this lifetime, but we also came in with this mindlessness in which we're separate from that sense of reality, sense of wholeness, and we're dumped in a space in which we have free will as to whether or not we want to follow what comes from our heart or what comes from our head. And that free will is fundamental, because yes, you can get somebody to the point, especially when they're in a crisis, to come to your door and follow a set of rules. But as soon as they get well, what are they going to do? Are they going to revert to form and only come back to your door when they're in the next crisis? Or will you be able to use enough impetus from that experience with them to encourage them to change the way they're being at a fundamental level? And this, for me, is both encouraging and frustrating, because I get even with farmers, you give them a remedy and say, well, if you put this in the trough, that's going to help prevent this problem, and it's a seasonal problem. And they come back to you the next year and say, I've got the problem again. I said, well, you've got the remedy. Oh, I've stopped using that. And you said, well, didn't you get the message that you're getting the problem is in the soil? Now you can't go around killing the soil, because that wouldn't be right. But what you're doing is you're giving your animals an opportunity to get a leg up on the problem. So if you work with them, then that there's a simple and economical answer to the problem. And what you tend to find is, as with farmers, so with the rest of the population, that there's a certain percentage of people that feel it's valuable enough to want to follow through on this, in order that they use homeopathy as the first line of approach. And then you've got and those people, if you look at it, are the ones who feel strongly enough to take on board that level of responsibility that moves them in that direction. Whereas you get a large proportion of the population that say, if there's something wrong with me, it's not my fault, and I should go down the road to a guy in a white coat and ask him to excise my lessons from me because they're inconvenient. And I think, to a certain extent, we're a very unevolved species, in the sense that we've forgotten who we are, why we came here, and what the purpose of life is, to the extent that we feel if something goes wrong, even though we've caused it, it's somebody else's problem.
I think it's very much a mindset problem, isn't it? And I think healthcare itself has, the wonders of modern medicine have made us very, dare I say it, lazy. Just a quick fix is all we need. Pop a pill and get on with your day job as such. And there's no time to take responsibility for your own health. But I think that's very much a mindset, and I have found that since post-COVID, if we can even go there, because of various reports, saying there's a rise again. But anyway, since the first outbreak as such, people, a large chunk of people around the world have reflected. They've had plenty of time to reflect, to sit at home with loved ones, and sadly, sometimes even on your own. But it's given this opportunity to think about things on a serious level, much deeper level. And, people have become a bit more receptive, or should I say, a good size portion have become more responsible, actually. So something positive has come out of it, where they're looking at alternatives they're thinking, well, hang on, if something like this happens again, what are we going to do? And this has led to some very fruitful paths. People have started to meditate. People have moved to homeopathy. People have started exercising. They're looking at nutrition. They're thinking about what they eat. It's not just soda pops all day and coffee all day long and sweeties and whatnot. So some good has, of course, come out of it. Of course, long way to go, isn't it? But it's sad that it took something like the pandemic actually to make people think as such, though. But here we are.
I think that the significant thing that I noticed was how people were motivated more by fear than anything else. Fear was the driver. The facts are the facts of the realities associated with the virus were secondary compared to the very useful manipulation of fear, and fear was the driver that was exercised to a huge extent. And you can see how this wasn't a scientific change, this was a political change. This was an exercise in almost totalitarianism, in the way you could change the attitude of a society by pressing the fear button to the extent that you told them something that was, your survival is under threat. If you don't do what I say, your survival is under threat. And people became compliant. Most of the population became entirely compliant because they actually feared that if they didn't, they would die. And I think the message got lost in translation, because through whatever dimension it was manifest, it was quite clear that if you told people, or even gave the impression that if they got this thing, they were going to die, their knee-jerk reaction was, I don't want to die, I will do anything not to die. And they would follow any set of rules, which is a kind of a dysfunctional attitude towards common sense and human nature. And the only people who rebelled against that were the ones that said, hang on a minute, do I want to react towards this information, or do I want to step back and consider what's actually being presented here? And unfortunately, there was too little consideration, too much reacting. And then, of course, there was a belief in the disseminated information by the powers that be that said, well, what I'm telling you is the truth and you have to believe me. And we ended up with this rather dystopian scenario where all common sense left the planet, and we were told, do this or you're going to threaten everybody around you. And stepping back in retrospect, you see in reality that the dangers of catching this disease were actually very minimal compared to what was being disseminated as information. And most people's attitude was, if I get this thing, I'm going to die. But the evidence didn't support that. And unfortunately, what we're looking at is, in conclusion, is if something like this happened again, to what extent will people stand back and say, hang on a minute, do I want to go down the same road? Do I feel, and my guess is they will, because the fear button will be pressed again and we'll go through the whole scenario. I'm always hopeful that in human nature that people will learn from their experience. But my experience is that it requires the courage to stand back and say, you know what, I hear what you're saying, but I'm got a feeling that what you're telling me, and my gut feeling is there's something smells a bit wrong here, and I'm going to follow my heart rather than what you're telling me. And that's the path that a lot of people who venture down into homeopathy take. They say, well, yes, okay, I agree And I understand that most people want to follow the status quo, and they want to place their responsibility for their health in the hands of authorities. So I see that the road that we're talking about with homeopathy is very much a personal journey that people take because they're following their hearts rather than necessarily just something that they've been told to do.
Mm.
And it takes that degree of evolvement of human nature to get more people down to this path. And I don't see how that's going to change unless more people recognize that they're responsible for the choices that they're making. And the difficulty and the question I have is, to what extent are people willing to take responsibility for their lives? And to what extent are they saying, that's not my problem, and we're into the blame culture. If something goes wrong with me, it's the state's fault. They have to get me better. And I'm willing to listen to them rather than go with the feeling that I have that's telling me that I should take a different role, different path.
It's raised a very, very interesting question indeed. But I certainly hope that we don't have to go through what we have been through over the last several years, because it has done a lot of emotional damage, and it's set people back in many ways, with a myriad of mental health problems and anxieties, and also it's made people introvert as well. It's so much easier, isn't it, just to sit home and with technology, everything can be done. I mean, you don't actually literally have to physically go out anywhere. Everything can now be done from home. Even this hybrid model of working is a great success. And in fact, I don't know if you can call it hybrid, because I find that more people are working, they'll say they're working 5 days a week, but 4 of those days are actually at home. They only have to go into the office once a week, and then even that's for 3 or 4 hours. So technically it's not really hybrid. It's almost fully home-based, isn't it?
It is. And I think we've seen some significant changes in the way people work that have come on the back of this. People, as you say, people working from home, people realizing that offers them a different type of freedom, companies having to shift, companies saying, oh, that's interesting. Well, if you're willing to work at home using your electricity, and why do I need to rent a building in central London? Why do I can save on the expense? And suddenly realizing we don't need to travel so much. We can have Zooms rather than flying around for meetings. So there are a mixed bag of advantages as well as disadvantages in the way that we've arrived at this place. But I'm less less optimistic than you that we won't go through this thing again. My sense is that there will be other viruses that come out, and how much have we learned about the knee-jerk reaction to this, and how much are we willing to be directed by the powers that be rather than making our free will choices?
I was going to ask you something a bit light-hearted, actually, because that was quite a deep conversation. I want to pick your brain on something, which I'm sure the listeners will find interesting. With all your experiences working at Ainsworths, what are the remedies that you're often, what are the remedies that are sort of, you can't call them bestsellers, but the ones that are more often repeated? Are they the bulk standard ones like arnica and belladonna and aconite, or do you find it's just a mixed bag of no-sows and batch flower and remedies?
I think we've got about 5,000 remedies, and we make new ones all the time. And I think
amazing.
They venture into different camps. I think one of the things I could answer that in so many different ways, but one of the areas that, apart from the homeoprophylaxis and then the COVID stuff that I was talking about with the no-sows there, one area that I find fascinating is tautopathy. And tautopathy is essentially making remedies from, drugs or drugs that are causing side effects. And this is interesting because it actually has increasingly little to do with conventional homeopathy, because you're not treating the underlying disease. You're treating the consequence of somebody taking a drug and having a side effect and trying to unravel that whilst allowing them to take the drug. And one of the early experiences I had with that was with a child who had leukemia and was going in for the chemotherapy. And I just, had a lecture on, some postgraduate lecture on by some nurses who were giving one of the chemotherapy drugs called cisplatin. And they were saying to me, well, this stuff causes huge vomiting. And we're not just talking about normal vomiting here. The retching is so powerful, it has been known to wrench the esophagus off the stomach.
Ooh.
And you think, that's some retching. And this child was under 12, and he couldn't have the anti-emetics, the thing called metoclopramide that was given to adults, because they caused extrapyramidal symptoms. So there was very little that could be done for this child to cope with the vomiting. And the mother phoned up and said, look, little Johnny was in hospital for 6 weeks the first time he had the cisplatin. He's going in again. Is there anything you can do to alleviate this nightmare that's coming towards us at a rapid rate? And we had made a remedy from cisplatin. We gave it to him. And by pre-dosing, before he had the infusion, he was able to come out of hospital within 4 days rather than 6 weeks. And I thought, well, this is a pretty useful technique. And when you think about it, it's as straightforward as anything, because if somebody has a drug and they're having side effects of the drug, we pretty much know that if we make a remedy from that drug, that's going to take the side effects away. And if it's a drug that they have to take on a regular basis and they can't stop, then it's useful because it stops them going further down that iatrogenic line where they're going to have another drug and another drug for the side effects of the first and the second drug. And to give you, there's multiple examples I can give you. I mean, the most recent one I have was a lady who came into the shop who had fallen off a horse, broke her back about 20 years ago, and had been living on opiate painkillers, and she's now on fentanyl. Fentanyl is 10 times more lethal than heroin. And it's so lethal, they don't give it to you in tablets, they give it to you as a patch, like a plaster. And you put the plaster on and it gives you a slow release of the drug into your skin. Tiny, tiny amounts go into the skin over time to give you a continual pain relief. And, she came in and she was having huge sweats as a side effect to this drug. And we said, okay, well, let's see what we can do is we can make a remedy to the patch, which we did. And we had to be very careful, because if we just touched that patch, it could be lethal to us. She, gotten graduated up to a dose. But we made a remedy from one of these patches and ran it to a 30C. And she was standing in front of me, and I gave her the remedy, and she took it while she was in the shop. And within under a minute after taking the tablet, she looked at me and she said, oh my God, it feels like somebody's just drained a huge tank of water. And at that point, she recognized that she could control this horrendous side effect to the drug while still taking the drug. It didn't compromise her taking the drug, and the condition she had was inoperable because the surgeons were worried about permanently paralyzing her if the operation went wrong. And so she was left in this situation where the best she could do was to take the drug, and the best we could do was to antidote the side effects. And you can do that with any drugs that are on the market causing side effects. And when you see the advert on television and they say this drug will cure you, and then they speed up the language and say it will cause nausea, vomiting, your left arm to fall off, and and all of those things that they say is the homeopathic benefit of the remedy.
So these these remedies, or these medicines which have now become remedies, are they readily available? So people are on remedies for blood pressure, which is becoming so common now, and other conditions as well, like statins and so forth.
Yes, I mean, things like Ramipril, which blood pressure drugs which give you a nasty cough. If you take Ramipril as a homeopathic remedy, you can still take your Ramipril, but without having the cough. I remember doing this years ago with nifedipine Adalat for another blood pressure drug that will cause your feet to swell. If you took the drug as a homeopathic remedy concurrently, you would still have the effect, but your feet wouldn't swell up. So
I think amlodipine is also one, isn't it? That's a well-known side effect of swelling of the ankles.
That's right. So it's the same deal. And if you take amlodipine in potency, then it takes down the swelling without having you coming off the drug. Now, that's a benefit to people who want to maintain the drug therapy, but look for a halfway house to help. It's same sort of thing happens with like it's in the middle of the hay fever season, and we make pollens and grasses that are indigenous to this country, and give those to people as an antidote. So you can do that with cat hair, you can do it with dog hair, you can do it with horse dander. All of these things are arguably not necessarily a synonym, but they are the causative agent, and you can use that remedy when the person is sensitive to the problem. Because the body is generating symptoms as a reaction. Now you could go further and you could say, okay, well, there's a miasmatic underpinning to that, and obviously you start looking at remedies to stop the symptoms coming through in the first place. But in relation to a quick fix, it's very easy to reach for remedies made from the condition as an adjunct to any constitutional treatment.
The true wonders of homeopathy never ceased to exist or
Amen,
to surprise, Now, Tony, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. But I can't leave without asking you about whether you have time for any hobbies. Because it sounds like you're extremely dedicated. I was going to say busy, but I changed it just at the last moment, because busy, of course you are, but I think it's the dedication which is very commendable. And give you a virtual round of applause from all my listeners as well. It's been fascinating today. But do you get time for any hobbies, and if so, what are they?
Well, I'm racing around between. I live about 150 miles from the shop, so I'm racing backwards and forwards up the motorway. So I get very little time.
Far. Wow.
Yeah. Well, I chose to be in I wanted to move out of London because I found that I needed to be in a place which was closer to nature, to get a kind of a salve, a healing, my own personal healing. So there's an element of that, and being in the countryside, being able to walk in the countryside and have the fresh air and the freedom and the views. So that's part of it, and gardening. But I also, from an old lifetime when I was a druid, I got very interested in wood, and I love carving and wood turning and making objects like that, which give me a sense of escapism in doing something that creates something, but also relaxes the mind. But I like you, I feel that homeopathy has been a calling, and it sort of as a calling, it's not like an everyday job. It's something
Mm.
that, you know, one has a passion for, and there's a purpose. So it's always, you know, it's an enjoyment in its own right.
Absolutely. Tony, it's been Tony Pinkus. It's been an absolute joy. I'm still thrilled after this conversation. The thrill level is still there. It's really been great to have you on the podcast today, and I sincerely hope that later this year you'll come back and we can talk some more, because you know, the knowledge that you have is not only inspiring, but it's also very motivating, and it's fascinating as well.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope I haven't sent everybody to sleep, but I'm you know, I've enjoyed it as well.
And that was part 3 of a 3-part special with Tony Pinkus from Ainsworths Homeopathic Pharmacy. That really was fascinating, don't you think? So much knowledge, and most certainly exemplary commitment, dedication and passion to serve humanity through homeopathy. Now, Tony will join me again later this year, and I'm really looking forward to it, actually. I can't wait, and we'll talk some more. Now, remember, you can listen to all 3 parts of my conversation with Tony Pinkus by visiting my website, www.liketreatslike.co.uk, and then from the menu, just head to the radio and podcast tab, and as soon as you land on that page, you'll see actually pictures of all the guests I've had on the show so far, and you can just click the appropriate podcast and stream on demand as such. Now, don't forget to follow my socials on Instagram, TikTok or Facebook under Like Treats Like, and you'll find links there for the website. And also, interestingly enough, there's a lot of trailers that I produce. So before every podcast, a few days before, there's always a trailer, and it's either an audio trailer or a video trailer of the guests themselves who are appearing on the podcast itself. And you'll find that quite interesting as well. And do share, please. Now, next time on the Homeopathy Health Podcast, I'll be speaking to Dr. Sharon Ali, who is a homeopath in Pune in India. And following that, the week after, I'll be speaking to Dr. Gaurang Gaikwad, who is a homeopathic doctor from Mumbai in India. I do hope you've enjoyed the Homeopathy Health Show here on UK Health Radio, the world's #1 talk health radio. Tune in next time for more things homeopathy, interviews and segments on the healing possibilities that homeopathy can bring you. And don't forget to visit UK Health Radio online at www.ukhealthradio.com to see the many other amazing shows available to listen live and on demand. Or why not download the app from the iOS and Android stores. Until next time, stay safe and take care. So until next week, I hope you have a pleasant week ahead, and keep busy, keep focused, but also enjoy the beauties of nature. Take time to exercise, look after your health, make sure you're having the right food types, keep up on your vitamins and supplements, make sure you're nutritionally balanced. So until next time, take care of yourselves, and I very much look forward to speaking to you soon.